reason of a wholly non-arbitrary character. But according to Kant, there are more such fundamental laws governing the use of reason. You see, no way we cannot, it is absolutely necessary to interpret patches and sounds and what have you as things. This necessity is not due to the fact that otherwise we would perish, which we of course would, yeah? You know, the organism. But it has a more fundamental reason. It is evidently necessary to interpret these sense data as qualities of things. The argument of Kant, the whole critique of critical reason, is an attempt to show that, and especially to show against Hume. Hume had said, what the sensitive perceive, why do they take it as an instrument of learning? Or teaching. Whereas Hume had said, we sensitively perceive now that. Now this, now that, now that. Temporal sequence of impressions. The causal sequence, A is the causal sequence, is in no way perceived, and therefore has no basis in experience, and as he also shows, it is no basis in reason. Kant tries to show that the very possibility of establishing the temporary prior to the temporary posterior presupposes the use of causality. What we have as mere impressions, A, B, C, is the merely subjective line. But the objective order, for example, what is an example? I don't remember, I remember only one example now, this. You find a heavy object on a cushion. You find that. Why is the cushion, how do you say? Impressed. Why is it? Yeah, why is the cushion impressed? That principle, in other words, what's the cause, what's the effect? Yeah? Okay. Here you have simultaneous impressions. The simultaneous impressions cannot be understood properly without recourse to causality. In other words, the distinction between the subjective order of impressions and the objective order of events, without which no intelligent orientation is possible, presupposes causality as a means for establishing the objective temporal order. I mean, the details we cannot possibly go, then we would have to devote 2 quarters at least to the discussion of the central characteristic of theory. Yeah?
Does Kant then mean that what you might call proper objects of reason, pure reason, are in no way, are products of the reason itself imposed on the data received by the sense?
You can put it this way. The possible object of experience, the possible object is constituted by reason. The possible object is of course understood not as a single object. It is understood as one object among many, simultaneous as well as perceiving and data. Yeah? This whole Kant calls nature. Nature is, we can say, the totality of all possible objects, or if you want of all possible events. This nature as a whole, which is presupposed in any particular observation regarding any particular event, is the constituted by reason. For this reason, Kant says, nature prescribes nature's laws. the most fundamental laws of nature are the positing, but the necessary and evidently necessary positing of reason. Yeah. Now, Mr. Burns.
I wonder, why did Kant think that this framework of all possible experience was the same in all men?
Because they are all human beings. Because that is a human nature. It is a human nature.
So then the argument would rest on psychology then?
Yeah, that is a very complicated question. I think Kant would, why Kant took for granted that that's human nature, but how this, Kant's, now how does Kant really proceed? I mean, if you take, I take one way in which Kant has been taken interpreted, which is not baseless, which may not be sufficient, and that is this. That Kant starts from the fact of genuine science, mathematics, theoretically, and raises the question how they are possible, and ascends to the conditions of possibility of any objective knowledge. But one can enlarge that in Kant's side, because Kant certainly is not concerned merely with science. With our understanding, from Kant's point of view, scientific understanding is only a more radically true form of our ordinary understanding. If a scientist discovers the cause of a certain event, he does nothing fundamentally different from what we do if we find out who killed whom. And not radically. Because here too, as you know, the detective cannot simply look for observations. He must have a hypothesis guided by such general notions, motive and opportunity. We have read enough thrillers to know that as very valuable. And so here also there is a thing. Now, he can't ascend from the fact of experience in its pre-scientific as well as in scientific sense to the conditions of possibility of that. The conditions of possibility of that experience. But on the other hand, it is undeniable that Kant begins the whole argument from the unquestioned that man is a rational animal. The great changes which took place after Kant, especially in the later part of the 18th, 19th century, I want to go for this, that people admit, outside of the strictly positivist circles, that there must be a framework of understanding if there is to be any human life. But they say these frameworks of understanding differ from society to society. In other words, the system of categories, we can use that term, is not, as Kant said, one and the same for all men, but there is a variety of such. That you must have. Sociology of knowledge is such a form of that. These conscious things in modified forms affect much of present-day thought, but of course not in the strict sense in which Kant meant it.
Now, as to the classical view that there is an order in the external world, would Kant have to deny that, or could he merely admit this as a possibility and say whether there is or not, this view would still be the same?
No, Kant would say, well, of course he would in a way largely admit it, but he would say this, that the necessity of such an order, the necessity of such an order can never be understood from experience. Yeah? No, because that all experience is open to this objection, maybe up to now. With what right can I expect its continuation? There cannot be necessity and universal validity derived from experience. Now that there should be possible to grasp necessities, objective necessities, to call them, to use this word for the last time in this course, except only in senses which Kant himself legitimate, objective necessities that Kant denies. There is no possibility. The only form of prehension which man has is sense prehension. There is no intellectual prehension. That is axiomatic for Kant.
But he's not led to an outright denial of order in the external world. No. But this order, that is a very great problem for Kant, and in a way the critique of judgment has been written to clarify that. But I give you the practical consequence, where it really comes out. Kant admits it as a matter of course that the science of living beings must be teleological. Yeah? That you cannot understand an animal without speaking of functions. Very simple thing. And to use this as a significant term and not in a sterilized way means teleological understanding. Function 4, stomach 4, and so on and so on. But Kant says we cannot assert, we do not know that the living beings are teleological. We must use teleology as a heuristic principle. We cannot begin to study the stomach without knowing what the stomach is for, or without raising this question. But that is not, we have no knowledge of teleology. You see, whereas as far as the mechanical laws are concerned, that's knowledge. I can't say more now because it would become infinite and we must try to proceed in orderly fashion. Now someone in the last row wants to raise his hand, or was I mistaken? And then Mr. Gill.
In what is the permanent and necessary nature of human reason itself rooted for Kant, assuming that it is itself a positive of human reason?
That, I think they only give you only one answer, which must be bound to be absolutely correct. In the ego cult, in the I thing, we may take up this at a later stage.
Yes. What did you mean when you said that, but the classes, they took it passively?
Receptive. And Aristotle uses this term again from time to time too, as a kind of being affected, passive, being affected, not of doing. It's a very simple point. If you would sit down and read slowly the 4th chapter of Aristotle's Soul, of the 3rd book of Aristotle's Soul, then you would get the most coherent statement which we have of the classical value, which is very difficult to understand. There is but takes a simple thing as they are presented in so many Platonic dialogues, and that is fundamentally correct. We view, we grasp, we see with our mind's eye essential necessities. But did you never have this? You see, oh yes, it's very common. And you hear this even in positivistic debates. You study facts and have all kinds of theories and whatnot. Yeah? And then the question is raised, what's the pattern? Yeah? before you have seen it, if you don't see a pattern, it seems to be an interesting study. But sometimes you see a pattern. You see a pattern. That is Platonic expression. You see, you do not impose it. You see a pattern. Now have you ever had this experience that out of a mere agglomeration of all kinds of data, suddenly some order comes to sight? An order which is in there, but which you have not previously seen. Let us leave it at this simple and homely example that every social scientist speaks of becoming aware of a pattern that is a recollection of what Plato and
Yes, but was not it for Kant also that he saw a certain order which exists? Because if he would create it, even if you
not he, reason in Kant, reason in you.
Yes, but I remember when we were reading about the moral law, but he was stressing that the moral law is binding on all reasonable beings, not only men.
Yes,
So it
sure.
means he cannot say that men or in men.
That's it. Reason has, practical reason has an entirely different status. In practical reason, moral, in practical reason is fully determining without the help of sense perception, and therefore the specifically human does not come in. Whereas in theoretical reason is determining only with the help of sense perception, i.e. a human peculiarity, and therefore the human comes in there. But we must now return. You raise all kinds of very necessary questions, but we must stick to a certain surface of the argument, otherwise we will not make any progress. Now let us read the sequel where we left off. After the Copernican revolution.
A similar experiment can be tried in metaphysics as regards the intuition of objects. If intuition must conform to the constitution of the objects, I do not see how we could know anything of the latter a priori. But if
in other words, Kant denies implicitly that there can be a prehension of evident necessity. That is the implication of this statement. Yeah.
But if the object, as object of the senses, must conform to the constitution of our faculty of intuition, I have no difficulty in conceiving such a possibility. Since I cannot rest in these intuitions if they are to become known, but must relate them as representations to something as their object, and determine this later through them, either I must assume that the concepts by means of which I obtain this determination conform to the object, or else I assume that the objects are what is the same thing, that the experience in which alone, as given objects, they can be known, conform to the concepts. In the former case, I am again in the same perplexity as to how I can know anything a priori in regard to the objects. In the latter case, the outlook is more hopeful, for experience is itself a species of knowledge which involves understanding, and understanding has rules which I must presuppose as being in me prior to objects being given to me, and therefore as being a priori. They find expression in a priori concepts to which all objects of experience necessarily conform, and with which they must agree. As regards objects which are thought solely through reason, and indeed as necessary, but which can never...
No, not as necessary, and which are thought solely through reason, and indeed are necessarily thought necessarily thought, not arbitrary but we think that, yeah?
but which can never, at least not in the manner in which reason thinks them, be given in experience. The attempts at thinking them, for they must admit of being thought, will furnish an excellent touchstone of which we are adopting as our new method of thought, namely, that we can know a priori of things only what we ourselves put into them.
Yeah. Now, what is the main point which he's trying to make? From the previous, not analysis, but report of Kant of what he has done, it follows that reason is unable to know anything of non-sensibles. Reason can only sketch the outline, the essential outline of possible objects of experience. And it can never, but possible objects of experience means possible objects of sensible experience. Reason has no possibility of knowing in any way supra-sensible objects. I.e. metaphysics in the traditional sense is impossible. Metaphysics as a knowledge of spiritual substances is impossible. But Kant makes here an important distinction between knowing and thinking. I can know, strictly speaking, only sensible things. But I know because the mere possible object is not yet knowledge, it's only the framework of knowledge. But I can think, and I must think, supra-sensible things, say God and the soul. But I cannot know them because in order to know them, I would need sense experience of them, or sense experience necessarily leading up to them, and such sense experience is utterly unable to do so, as Kant claims to have shown in the second part of the Critique of Pure Reason, its dialectic.
In that case, reason thinks, but it doesn't know.
Yeah.
Well, would you say that for Kant, then the activity of reason, as opposed in distinction of action and passion, in the Greek sense of the term, the activity of reason then consists in creation of, consists in its projects, in the sense that we spoke of before. That in the classical, in the scholastic notion of abstraction, Kant denies altogether.
No, he would deny that because something our concept of the past, what it was an empirical concept, is abstract from particular kinds, contradictory. That's no problem. But that is only an empirical concept. It lacks any, it lacks true necessity. And that has something to do with the problem of sin and possible. Mr. Burns?
Well, how does Kant know that reason can know nothing of nonsensical things? Or how does Kant know that there is no such thing as intellectual perception?
I do not remember any explicit discussion of that. Later on in the 90s, certain successors of Kant began to speak of intellectual intuition, which plays a great role up to, but not including Hegel. And Kant rejected that altogether. Kant's notion is this, that would lead us very far in that what Kant calls here thinking as distinguished from knowing. Very crudely said, we must bring, say, an intelligent order of the world, this intelligent author of the world would not have any receptivity because he knows receptivity presupposes the existence of these things already, and he makes them an originary intellect, as Kant calls it. And Kant's premise can be stated as follows. Intellectual intuition would be possible only for a creator proper. The Platonic Aristotelian notion is no longer discussed, and that has something to do with the prehistory of Kant with both Locke and Leibniz. I mean, that is not right. Mr. Kennedy?
Which kind of mental thinking of a moment is reflecting the argument of the critique itself?
Yeah, but that was the question which Mr. Hoppe raised last time. Is the critique of pure reason not knowledge? And it is obviously not knowledge of a sensible kind, nor is it like mathematics. Yeah? That is a very great question, and it is Kant has struggled very much. We will later come across that. I only want to follow now the first argument. Let us look at the end of the next paragraph, towards the end, where Kant draws a conclusion from this general sketch. And now it still remains open to us after the speculative reason. After speculative reason has been denied all progress in this field of the suprasensible, to try to have it. Who has it? So should read. We mustn't waste time with that, because it's hard for me to translate extempore from German into Dutch, German into English.
But when all progress in the field of the supersensible,
But
when all progress in the field of the supersensible has thus been denied through speculative reason, it is still open to us to inquire whether, in the practical knowledge of reason, data may not be found sufficient to determine reason's transcendent concept of the unconditioned, and so to enable us, in accordance with the wish of metaphysics, and by means of knowledge that is possible a priori, not only from a practical point of view, to pass beyond the limits of all possible experience. Speculative reason...
How did you say not only? How did you say that? Practical point of view. But only. Yeah?
No.
Huh?
Though only.
So only.
Yeah, from a practical point of view, to pass beyond the limits of all possible.
Ja, in praktischer Absicht. That's not in a practical intent would be a more literal translation. In a practical intent. Yes?
Speculative reason has thus at least made room for such an extension, and if it must at the same time leave it empty, yet nonetheless we are at liberty, indeed we are summoned to take occupation of it if we can, by practical data of reason.
Yeah, but I'll try to explain this as the most elementary and no means sufficient way. This analysis of reason in its use in experience leads to the consequence that there is possible only what we may call relative knowledge. Knowledge of the conditions of some event or type of event, which question immediately leads, or sooner or later leads to the question of the condition of those conditions. And that goes on in infinite. And we can never come beyond the stage of the knowledge of the condition. But the very notion, the very awareness of the relative presupposes an awareness of the absolute. It's impossible to think the relative without measuring time by something absolute. Kant uses the term the unconditioned. So we must think the unconditioned. We must think it. But we can never know it. All our knowledge is relative in the sense of its knowledge of conditions within certain limits, essentially pointing to further inquiry of these conditions in infinitum. But this awareness presupposes an awareness of some unconditioned, or more absolute. That is, we can only think, we cannot know. But there is one way, in which we have some access to the unconditioned, and that is a moral consciousness. Speculative reason has no prospect whatever in the field of the suprasensitive. But perhaps it finds in its practical knowledge data which permit it to determine the transcendent rational concept of the unconditioned. Anticipating, I cannot say more than this now. Man has an awareness of the unconditioned beyond the mere thinking of the unconditioned in the moral law. And therefore, the only way, or the only possible metaphysics, can be one based on the moral law. In very crude and provisional terms, Kant believes we can prove that we cannot consistently be decent people, act morally, if we do not believe in God. That is the only way in which we can, quote, know of God. But Kant doesn't call that knowledge, but belief. But he says that this belief is a rational belief, because its sole basis is a rational law of action, the moral law. And that is this is a general way in which Kant wants to proceed. Now we must read a few more passages, otherwise we will not make any headway. We drop the next paragraph. Yes. Go on.
But it will be asked,
Yeah.
but it will be asked, what sort of a treasure is this that we propose to bequeath to posterity?
Forgive me. I hope you don't mind my saying that. You need to hold it. Is there someone who has a better, has some training in reciting here, who could read now? Because that is really, otherwise one is distracted a bit.
But it will be asked, what sort of treasure is this we propose to bequeath to posterity? What is the value of the metaphysics that is alleged to be thus purified by criticism and established once for all? On a cursory view of the present work, it may seem that its results are merely negative, warning us that we must never venture with speculative reason beyond the limits of experience. Such is, in fact, its primary use. But such teaching at once acquires a positive value when we recognize that the principles with which speculative reason ventures out beyond its proper limits do not, in effect, extend the employment of reason, but, as we find on closer scrutiny, inevitably narrow it. These principles proper belong, not to reason, but to sensibility. And when thus employed, they threaten to make the bounds of sensibility coextensive with the real, and so to supplant reason in its pure, practical employment.
What comes to mind is this. If we do not make this, if we do not limit reason, theoretical reason, to its use in the field of sensible experience, then there is a danger. As a limited field, then there is a danger that we absolutize these principles which we use and must use in understanding the world of experience. And that leads to the consequence. Since absolute determinism is an essential implication of this experiential understanding, it leads to the consequence that there remains no place for freedom. So by restricting the use of reason to a definite field, to the field of experiential knowledge in the strict sense, sensible experience, we leave room, we gain room for a certain freedom. And that's the positive view. Yes? Hence?
So far, therefore, as our critique limits speculative reason, it is indeed negative. But since it thereby removes an obstacle which stands in the way of the employment of practical reasoning, nay, threatens to destroy it, it has in reality a positive and very important use. At least this is so. Immediately we are convinced that there is an absolute necessity, an absolutely necessary practical employment of pure reason, the moral, in which it inevitably goes beyond the limits of sensibility. Though practical reason, and thus proceeding, requires no assistance from speculative reason, it must yet be assured against its opposition, that reason may not be brought into conflict with itself. To deny that the service which the critique renders is positive in character would thus be much like saying that the police are of no positive benefit.
And so on. You see, Kant here tries to defend himself against a very simple and obvious kind of criticism, where critique of pure critique, that is a purely negative thing. Yeah? But in this connection, he gives us certain points. The defense of morality is possible only by virtue of such a critique. You remember when I spoke of Rousseau last time, I said of the necessity admitted by Rousseau of a Socratic wisdom which defends the conscience. There is a conscience, the primal data from Rousseau's point of view, and in a way Kant admits it. But this conscience is threatened by false theories. There is therefore need for a defense of the conscience, and that is Socratic wisdom in Rousseau's sense of the term. This Socratic wisdom is in a way the most important function of Kant's critique. Theoretical metaphysics might seem to be morally necessary, namely God and immortality. The fundamental premises of morality, according to Kant himself, are said to be established by theoretical metaphysics. But Kant says theoretical metaphysics has no higher status than the atheistic, deterministic ruled science. What a materialist says, an atheist, deterministic materialist says, has not a lower status than what the speculative theist and spiritualist. So by allowing any use beyond any use of theoretical reason beyond the limited field of experience, I must also consider not only what happens to spiritualistic metaphysics, I must also see that what is going to happen on the part of the materialistic deterministic people whose doctrine is incompatible with morality. Therefore, one moment again, the critique of reason shows not merely that theoretical reason is limited to experience, but also, and above all, that practical reason is necessarily independent of experience, or that practical reason is essentially supra-experiential, supra-sensible. Now, what did you say?
I wonder, when you premature analysis now, what status this freedom has is it in no way compared to the working, the necessary and deterministic working of the world of experiential knowledge. What status
the answer of Kant is given in the immediate sequence. Now let me see that we understand. It is given in the immediate sequence by the distinction between phenomena and things the things themselves. The materialistic, atheistic, deterministic procedure is absolutely necessary in the field of phenomenal knowledge. Absolutely necessary. But by realizing that the phenomenal world is not the true reality, we see at the same time the limits of materialism and so on. Yeah, materialism. From Kant, traditionally there would be no materialism in metaphysics, because metaphysics was an associated notion of equal knowledge. Therefore, no Epicurean metaphysics or materialistic metaphysics. From Kant's point, for the first time, both material and spiritual appear to be metaphysical because they transcend the legitimate sphere of theoretical knowledge, and all positivism is, of course, in this aspect, descended from Kant. Yeah? All positivism because a beautiful document is Lenin's criticism of Mach. Mach was one of the founders of the more recent type of positivism, and for him philosophy consisted in what he called analysis of sensations, straight sensations. No assertion that there are things, only passion, because of passion. And that was as much opposed to spiritualism as to materialism. And then Lenin, who among his many vices had also a certain robust common sense, attacked him in a book, Empiriocriticism and Dialectic Materialism, or what the exact title is, which is quite interesting reading because a certain simple sense for truth. Really rebels here in Hegel, in and all. It's very, very historical. In Lenin, against one. And that is a very long section now, and I think we must read that somehow, this next point, but I believe we postpone it until next time and look rather at some other point. I would like to, we have to read indeed quite a few of the following remarks. Perhaps I will take some shorter passages. This very long paragraph, at the end of it, Kant gives another characterization of what he's doing. When he says, do you have about 8 or 9 lines from the end? If one takes into consideration the inestimable advantage which the critique of pure reason brings, to finish for all times with all objections against morality and religion in a Socratic manner, namely through the clearest proof of the ignorance of the adversary. Confronted with an atheist, for example, Kant will refute him in Socratic manner. So you don't know what you assert, you claim to know. The utmost you can say is that in your capacity as dealing with things of experience, pre-scientific or scientific, you have to proceed on a deterministic materialistic premise, but that's not all. What Kant tries to show is that while his first attack, and the first aim of the attack, seems to be the traditional spiritualistic metaphysics, he emphasizes that it is as much opposed to the opposite view, to the materialistic, nihilistic, deterministic view. And it is interesting that the term Socrates occurs in this context. It is Kant's critique of reason is real. Socratic wisdom in the way in which Rousseau understood the word. Defense of the conscience. But of course a defense of the greatest possible sophistication. Now, these other passages we disregard now, and that is very awkward with this absence of shock. Now let me see that I remember for next time what we do not have to read it. Now I would like, because I think one should not end such a meeting with some detail. We come back to some details next time. I would now like to state the broader questions which emerge. We have heard from two things we have heard from Kant. Whether we have understood them is an entirely different matter. First, the true basis of metaphysics is morality, not theoretical knowledge of any kind. For example, it is impossible to prove, according to Kant, to prove the existence of God by ascending from the visible universe and say either in the Aristotelian way or by looking at the order, the teleological order of things. Kant tries to show that this argument has no power whatever. The true basis of metaphysics, i.e. of the rational statement, if I may say so, about God and its immortality of the soul is morality. And the second point is the Copernican revolution. Reason is projective, constitutive, not receptive or passive. Two questions arise. First, only in and through morality does man become aware of the supra-sensible. Only morality is not and cannot be in need of experience, but is purely rational. Why? Second, is there a connection between the supremacy of practical reason? That practical reason alone opens up to us a vista into the thing in itself. Is there a connection between the supremacy of practical reason and the new view of theoretical reason? Is there an essential connection, in other words, between the assertion that the true basis of metaphysics is morality and the Copernican revolution. Reason is projecting constitutive. Now, we turn perhaps now to the first question and begin a discussion of that. And for this purpose, we turn to a much later passage at the beginning of the Dialectics. If you give me your book, a copy, I will find it for you. The section on the ideas in general. Yeah. That's on page 254 in this edition. The title page is not in. The third paragraph, page 255. Now, only one word must be said for our purposes now. Kant is compelled to make a distinction between the understanding and reason. This distinction is entirely different from the traditional distinction of understanding and reason. In the traditional view, the understanding is the higher of the two. The understanding, let's say, is the faculty of mental perception. And reason is the faculty of connecting or distinguishing and so on the objects of mental perception. In Kant, understanding is the faculty by virtue of which we can organize the sense state. What we do as in ordinary life as well as in science is to use understanding for interpreting sense state. It's the use of the principle of causality. For example, causality, mathematics is all understanding. But we are in other words, in all dealing with the conditions, only the understanding comes into play. But we are compelled to think the unconditioned, say, or if you please, the absolute, which does not primarily mean God, but absolute simply as the opposite of the conditions. This is where reason comes in. Reason is in a way, it's a higher faculty, but it is also the emptier faculty. So reason has for Kant, as he put it, only a regulative, not a constitutive use. Understanding is constitutive, constitutes the possible object of experience. But the horizon of infinite progress in studying the conditions, and so on, this prospect of infinity, without which science is impossible, but of which it cannot make any concrete use given the position, that is wisdom. Now we will get a somewhat clear idea from what we shall read now, because Kant calls the concept of reason as distinguished from the concept of the understanding. He calls this concept of reason idea. It is an old term which he reinterprets. And we begin with that. Who has it to say?
From the way in which Plato uses the term idea, it is easy to see that he meant by it something which not only was never borrowed from the senses, but which even far transcends the concepts of the understanding, with which Aristotle occupied himself, there being nothing in experience corresponding to the ideas.
So in other words, words, what Kant simply does is this. Aristotle's categories, that corresponds to what Kant calls concept of understanding. This concept of understanding Kant says are of such a nature that in experience there can be found something congruent with it. Causality, we find specific causal relations. Thing and qualities, as considered physics, we find things and qualities. But take the other Aristotelian categories, quantity, quality, of course we find qualities in sense experience. Kant interprets the difference between Aristotle and Plato in these terms. Whereas Aristotle and the Aristotelian category. Now let's see. Go on, sir.
With him, the ideas are archetypes of things themselves, not only like the categories, keys to possible experiences. According to his opinion, they flowed out of the highest reason, which, however, exists no longer in its original state, but has to recall with difficulty the old but now very obscure ideas, which it does by means of...
That is the terrible translation. According to his opinion, they flow from the highest reason and has to come to kind of Is this the only English translation?
No.
Why don't you...
And from that source have come to be shared in by human reason, which, however, is now no longer in its original state.
Namely, the human reason, yeah?
But is constrained laboriously to recall by a process of reminiscence, which is named philosophy, the old ideas now very much obscure.
But in other words, Kant gives you an extremely crude rendering of the most tried traditional view of Plato. We don't have to learn that. But he's striving at something else. Mr. King, do you have a copy of this good?
It's on page 310.
Yeah.
Of the
All right.
Smith.
I shall not engage here in any literary...
No, that's not good, it's something. Leave that. Because we must really concentrate, yeah? Yeah?
I shall not engage here in any literary inquiry into the meaning which this illustrious philosopher attached to the expression. I need only remark that it is by no means unusual, upon comparing the thoughts which an author has expressed in regard to the subject, whether in ordinary conversation or in writing, to find that we understand him better than he has understood himself. As he has not sufficiently determined his concept, he has sometimes spoken or even thought in opposition to his own intention.
You know, this is a very famous phrase, to understand an author better than he understood himself. Someone told me that the phrase is older than Kant. The library man, I forgot who it was, but I knew it was the person who was, I would say, forgotten immediately. But I forgot everything about it. But it is not older than. Now Kant means it, of course, this expression in a very sober and limited sense. It is possible to understand another human being, even a very human being, under certain conditions, better than he understood himself. And therefore what Kant is saying here is not meant to be an interpretation of Plato's teaching as Plato meant it, but Kant gives here the notions which Plato suggested to him. And these notions which Plato suggested to Kant are, from Kant's point of view, more defensive and truer than what Plato explicitly said. Yes?
Plato very well realized that our faculty of knowledge feels a much higher need than merely to spell out appearances according to a synthetic unity in order to be able to read them as experience.
You see, spelling and reading are here used in a strict metaphor.
He knew that...
I mean, the mere experiences must be spelled, must be reduced to something like letters in order to be able to be read as experience. This spelling and reading goes beyond any things which mere sensation can possibly give. That is, the reading we can say, understanding. The understanding is distinguished from the mere being struck by something, by a sensation. That is the functional understanding. Yes?
He knew that our reason naturally exalts itself to modes of knowledge which so far transcend the bounds of experience that no given empirical object can ever coincide with them, but which must nonetheless be recognized as having their own reality, which are by no means mere fictions of the brain. Plato found chief instances of his ideas in the field of the practical, that is, in what rests upon freedom, which in its turn rests upon modes of knowledge that are a peculiar product of reason. Whoever would derive the concepts of virtue from experience and make, as many have actually done, what at best can only serve as an example of an imperfect kind of exposition into a pattern from which to derive knowledge, would make of virtue something which changes according to time and circumstance, an ambiguous monstrosity not admitting of the formation of any rule. On the contrary, as we are well aware, if anyone is held up as a pattern of virtue, the true original with which we compare the alleged pattern, by which alone we judge of its value, is to be found only in our minds. This original is the idea of virtue, in respect of which the possible objects of experience may serve as examples, proofs that what the concept of reason demands is in a certain degree practical, but not as archetypal. That no one of us will ever act in a way which is adequate to what is contained in the pure idea of virtue is far from proving this thought to be in any respect a miracle. For it is only by means of this idea that any judgment as to moral work or its opposite is possible, and it therefore serves as an indispensable foundation for every approach to moral perfection. However, the obstacle in human nature, to the degree of which there are no assignable limits, may keep us far removed from its complete achievement.
Thank you very much. Let us stop here for a moment. You see, here Kant gives the reason why moral knowledge cannot possibly be derived from experience. Experience shows us all this concept, and Plato agrees with it, only imperfect human beings or imperfect institutions, for instance. But we cannot possibly recognize them as imperfect if we do not know the perfect. That's strict and good Platonism. Therefore, at least as Kant limits it to the practical field entirely, not entirely as we shall see there, but chiefly. The ought can never be refuted by the fact that it is never fully realized. Without that, Kant says we are bound to degrade morality. The distinction between is and ought, which today is used as the greatest engine for bolstering up the most atrocious Philistine, was made by Kant in order to avoid and to destroy the basis of any philosophy. This is the fate of one idea. So that is the simplest statement which we can find, that is in the view of your reason, why moral knowledge must be purely a priori, in no way based on experience. And therefore, whereas theoretical knowledge cannot but be based on experience, moral knowledge cannot possibly be based on experience. That is the outcome of the problem. And if it is true, as Kant assumes as a matter of course, that purely rational knowledge has necessarily a higher status than knowledge which is not purely rational, moral knowledge alone gives us an access to the unconditioned. Now, I think he goes now on to say that it's a very remarkable passage. By the way, those of you who are familiar a bit or more or less, or very much, with the history of Plato interpretation in the 19th, 20th century, must recognize how tremendous the influence of these passages is on that interpretation. For example, the basic experience of Plato, on which we refer, is a moral experience. It has infinitely open. But I really think that's the story. It is, of course, not without some foundation in Plato, that's not a matter. But this precision which Kant gives to the thought is quite remarkable. Now let us read, however, the next immediate sequence.
The Republic of Plato has become proverbial as a striking example of a supposedly visionary perfection, such as can exist only in the brain of the idle thinker. And Brooker has ridiculed the philosopher for asserting that a prince can rule well only insofar as he participates in the idea.
Well, Brooker was one of the first German historian of philosophy, after Stanley in
We should, however, be better advised to follow up his thought, and where the great philosopher leaves us without help.
He doesn't say the great philosopher, der vortreffliche Mann, the excellent man. Es ist ein Marker. Yeah. But it's interesting that he doesn't call him here philosophy, because that is more than philosophy in a technical sense. Yeah? Yes?
Where the excellent man leaves us without help, place it through fresh efforts in a proper light, rather than to set it aside as useless on the very sorry and harmful pretext of impracticability. A constitution allowing the greatest possible human freedom in accordance with laws by which the freedom of each is made to be consistent with that of all others. I do not speak of the greatest happiness, for this will follow of itself.
Yeah.
Is at any rate a necessary idea, which must be taken as fundamental, not only in first protecting the Constitution, but in all its laws. For at the start, we are required to abstract from the actual existing hindrances, which it may be, do not arise unavoidably out of human nature, but rather are due to a quite remediable cause, the neglect of the pure ideas in the making of the laws.
Now let us stop for one moment. You see here, Kant replaces the content of Plato's Republic by his notion of a rational social order. And it is, of course, strikingly different from the Platonic notion, but it confirms only what I said to begin with. The concern with the rights of man is the primary preoccupation of Kant. But Kant says still, in spite of the fact that that Plato's Republic is completely indifferent to freedom as Kant understands it, yet the formal character of the Republic is being an idea, as Kant calls it, an idea, is a model of the true idea of the rational society. And just one must imitate Plato, not in the content of his Republic, which is the philosopher's transformation, but in the intransigence in which Plato kept it clean against any objection based on experience. That this is not in any way correct, because Plato's Republic is of course meant to be based on experience. I do not want to go into that now. We will try to understand Kant. And that is a remarkable vindication of Plato against the extreme pedestrianism of the empiricism of the 18th century, contrasted with, say, Hobbes, Locke, and Hume. And therefore that had an enormous effect. Yeah, but still note the changed content. The perfect constitution, the right constitution is one in which the freedom of each can coexist with that of everyone else under laws. Yeah, that is the right word. And it is not concerned, as Kant emphasizes, with happiness. A good society is not as such directed to happiness as it would be according to the relation of independence, unless you emphasize the distinction between pursuit of happiness and happiness, and say the pursuit of happiness is the same as freedom, which one could say. Which one could say. And now it is a sequel until the end of the paragraph.
Nothing indeed can be more injurious or more unworthy of a philosopher than the vulgar appeal to so-called adverse experience. Such experience would never have existed at all if at the proper time those institutions had been established in accordance with ideas, and if ideas had not been displaced by crude conceptions which, just because they've been derived from experience, have nullified all good intentions.
Yeah, I think that is intelligible to you. Living on in very much of present-day thought, especially in the liberal version. For example, a reference to experience is, say, a certain people, classes, races, or whatever it may be, should not have these rights or privileges because experience shows that they will misuse them. And Kant says, yeah, but you have to consider the fact that their inability to use them is due to a preceding injustice, namely to the fact that they were brought into a condition where they could not possibly become citizens. In other words, it is really a strictly revolutionary principle which comes. I mean, not revolutionary as novel, but in the sense which one which leads to a revolution necessary. Yes?
The more legislation and government are brought into harmony with the above idea, the rarer the punishments become, and it is therefore quite rational to maintain, as Plato does, that in a perfect state no punishments whatsoever would be required.
Plato, to the best of my knowledge, never said that. But that's another point.
This perfect state may never indeed come to be. Nonetheless, this does not affect the rightfulness of the idea, which in order to bring the legal organization of mankind ever nearer to its greatest possible perfection, advances this maximum as an archetype. For
beg your pardon, at which?
Mankind may have to come to a stand.
They have to come, there must be emphasized, because there may be a limit. There may be a limit which cannot be surpassed.
And how great a gulf may still have to be left between the idea and its realization are questions which no one can or ought to answer. For the issue depends on freedom, and it is in the power of freedom to pass beyond any and every specified limit.
Or assigned limit. So in other words, that is another implication implied in Kant's reinterpretation of the idea, and to some extent perhaps implied in the Platonic idea itself. The idea can never become realized. But there are very different degrees of realization, more or less. There is no assignable limit. There is no assignable limit to the approximation. No assignable limit. In other words, infinite progress toward the idea is essentially possible. Essentially possible. This essential possibility of infinite progress cannot possibly be refuted, according to Kant, by any appeal to experience, because the ground of the idea is beyond experience. This notion of the possibility of infinite progress, take the example of infinite progress towards a rational society, it does not, of course, mean that the historical process itself is in fact progress. That's an entirely different proposition. But the essential possibility of infinite progress is essential to the idea of the rational society. And now here, at this moment, we touch on our problem of the history and progress. Does not the possibility of infinite progress towards a rational society presuppose the infinite duration of human life on earth? If we are compelled to assert on the basis of theoretical knowledge that human life on earth is not of infinite duration, how can we bring the two things together? Perhaps this is one reason why Kant did not elaborate the philosophy of history. Because an assertion regarding the historical progress means to make an assertion regarding the world in which we live. An assertion of this kind is a composite of a practical, moral assertion that the rational society ought to be our goal, and a theoretical assertion regarding the duration of human life on earth. There is a certain tension between these two assertions, and therefore, when Kant speaks of what morality compels us to hope for or to believe, he does not mention anything of this kind, but he mentions the immortality of the soul, because a life after death the assertion of life after death can in no way conflict with theoretical knowledge. We cannot prove nor can we refute the assertion of a life after death. One reason, I submit, why Kant did not elaborate a philosophy of history, but spoke of philosophy of history only in the kind of occasional writings, whereas the great theme of his philosophy, of his metaphysics, his God and immortality, is this, that only in the case of any assertion regarding the historical process, theoretical knowledge, i.e. not knowledge necessarily following from the dictates of the conscience, the pragmatism, necessarily enter. Whether that is sufficient, we must see. Yes, Mr. Gill?
This is dispensable for Kant to assume, presuppose the infinite duration of life on earth. Would it not be formally possible for him to assert the possibility of a duration of human life, let's say on any planet, longer than any specific assignable limit?
Yeah, but
with progress being possible, always possible in the
yeah, but then you see, then is the point where one does something which Kant did not want to do, and that is a kind of dream. You know, that's to say, making assertions regarding this visible universe, which cannot be refuted because we don't have the instrument. Because there is no space travel yet, and so on. But which in their nature are subject to confirmation or refutation by sense perception. Whereas the assertions against the soul and God cannot possibly be affected by any possible progress of science.
But it would seem to me that the assumption of unlimited life on earth must be agreed as the assumption.
Yeah, no, but Kant doesn't necessarily for this reason, perhaps. We must examine it more closely. In other words, one can state it as follows. Kant's moral philosophy, which culminates in his social philosophy, exemplified by the statement about the Russian society, is, in Kant's own opinion, incomplete without postulates of practicalism. He must hope or believe in order to act morally. Kant admits that he gives the example of Spinoza, and he says Spinoza was a decent man, but he had no hope and belief. And he makes some reflections about the fundamental unhappiness which he must have lived. Whether that is that leads to a psychological question regarding Spinoza, into which we don't have to go. And then I can't think there is something, we cannot possibly act morally without having a moral horizon. There are two forms in which this hope could be stated. Immortality of the soul and eternal life after death, or honors, i.e. progress toward perfect society. Kant was, of course, familiar with both possibilities, and he spoke of both of them. But it is striking that in the systematic presentation of the postulates, only the immortality of the soul occurs, and not the social progress, in a way. And this is a difficult question. I must see what the reasons are. I believe one reason is that in the immortality of the soul, no hypothesis of scientific character affecting subjects on which science is competent to speak anytime. In the case of progress, infinite progress occurs, of course. That is would make it, I would only have asked from Kant personal belief. Yeah? There are all kinds of books I have been reading that Kant was Aristotle was 1970, was a lower middle class pietist family, and from pietism he got his kind of religious simplicity, and from his lower middle class in Russia he got a certain submissiveness of cheating, and therefore he talked all the time of duty. Yeah? I mean, this nonsense, of course, you must do that. But when you think of the serious considerations here, that Kant took for quite a distance marriage, who one sees indeed, given this fundamental distinction of the, given this whole outlay of the problem, the immortality of the soul has a systematic preferability to the infinite progress on earth. Yeah? And that must be considered. Whether it is sufficient is an entirely different question. It is interesting that precisely the immortality of the soul was dropped by Kant's successors, who therefore, I venture to say, became philosophers of history. Whether they took care of the problem created by the possible finite duration of life on earth, that is a question which is generally regarded today as unimportant, because, well, who cares what will happen after 7 billion years, or whatever the most recent dates are forgotten. But for philosophers, the distinction between 1,000 years and 7 billion of years and n billions of years and true sense eternity and eternity are of course crucial, absolutely crucial. I mean, there's no, the attitude of the practical man, businessman, statesman is admirable in its spheres, but in its limits. Of course, it makes an enormous practical difference whether we know the earth will be destroyed during the lifetime of our children, or grandchildren, and whether it will be destroyed 1,000 years from now. It makes an enormous difference for our passion, our affection. But from the philosophical point of view, the bigness of the numbers is of no importance. And Kant had, whatever we may believe regarding the mortality of the soul, it implied a certain reservation regarding history, regarding human achievement. And it is, I will explain this next time, that when so-called existentialism, especially in its originator in Kierkegaard, was a return to Kant in this point. But I see one thing with great clarity, avec une clarté grande, as Descartes said in a more important respect. Is it not avec une clarté grande, avec une grande clarté? Descartes. He sees avec une grande clarté.
He actually does see that way.
Yeah, I say I see with a great clarity that we have still to take up a number of things regarding these points I mentioned. Nevertheless, I would be grateful if the next victim, Mr. Pollin, if I'm right-wing form, if you had your paper ready. But I cannot promise you that you will be able to read it.
Yeah, promise to be in good shape to read that sentence.
Yeah, that is true. We all are mortal.